All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us for this webinar. My name is Rebecca King. I'm a Policy Associate here at the National Housing Conference, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our presentation on opportunities for affordable housing and energy efficiency in the Clean Power Plan Final Rule. We have some excellent speakers and valuable information to share with you. Before diving in, I did want to touch on a few things. First, for those of you who aren't familiar, the National Housing Conference is the oldest affordable housing advocacy organization in the country. Our mission is to ensure safe, decent, and affordable housing for all. We work to achieve that through policy, research, and communication activities on a broad range of affordable housing issues. For example, just recently we put out our Paycheck to Paycheck report, which looks at millennials and millennial workers and the affordability challenges they face. So please check that out. And I also wanted to plug our Green Affordable Housing Coalition. We actually came to the Clean Power Plan and realized its potential and its importance because of our partners in the Green Coalition. NHC coordinates this with enterprise community partners and the U.S. Green Building Council. We meet quarterly. So if you are interested in learning more about that coalition, please follow up with me after the webinar. So now the reason you're here, let's get into the content. So our agenda, we're going to have an overview of the Clean Power Plan primer, a discussion of the final rule, a review and some examples around multifamily programs that could go into your state plan, and then some thoughts around getting engaged at the state level in advocacy. Our speakers today, and we'll start with Elizabeth Beardsley, who's Senior Policy Counsel at the U.S. Green Building Council, followed by Khalil Shahid, who's the Project Manager for Natural Resources Defense Council, then Lauren Ross, who's a Senior Policy Analyst at AC Tripoli, and then Todd Nedwick will close out our presentations. He's the Energy Efficiency Policy Director at the National Housing Trust. Then we will have a little bit of moderated discussion and hope to have plenty of time for audience Q&A. So please feel free to send your questions as we go. Just before we dive in, we will provide a recording, a link to the recording and all of the presentations to everyone who registered for the webinar. As I mentioned, you can ask questions through the question box at any time. And if you are having issues with the webinar technology itself, you can use the help menu or go to support.citrixonline to try and resolve those issues. With that, I am going to switch presentations and turn it over to Liz to get us started. So hold on just 1 second, folks. Apologies while we wait for this to show up. Well, thank you, Rebecca. I'm sure that will be up momentarily. So I'll just start talking. And first, I want to thank the National Housing Conference for hosting this event. We are really excited about the opportunity that will be presented in the next few years, and we really appreciate you all out there on the front lines in your communities and states taking the time out of your busy day to join us today. We're hoping to give you some more knowledge and tools to be able to advocate for what we see as a big opportunity for energy efficiency in affordable housing. So I'm going to kick things off starting with giving an overview of the primer. The primer has been developed by Energy Efficiency for All and partners listed on the front page, and that's available at a number of websites. And the link you'll see in your screen in a moment. We'll be providing that afterwards.
And basically the purpose is to explain the nexus between the Clean Power Plan and affordable housing, which may not be intuitive or obvious, especially for those that are outside of the clean air world. So we're trying to put it in understandable terms and introduce you to some of the terminology, and also to highlight key actions that advocates for affordable housing and efficiency can take to help your state make the most of this rule for affordable housing. The intended audience for the primer includes housing advocates, environmental advocates, and this includes staff, board members, volunteers. Municipal officials may also find it helpful. It may not be in the level of technical detail for state agency officials, but we think, again, this is really intended to get you all started and engaged on this rule and its implementation at the state level. Here's what it looks like. It looks great. It's 8 pages. It can be printed out or viewed online, and just provides introduction to the rule, and I'll talk through kind of what's in there, and you'll hear a little bit more detail from the other presenters. So first of all, what is the opportunity that we're talking about today? The Clean Power Plan is EPA's rule that was issued under the Clean Air Act, Section 111D, is sometimes referred to by that as well. And in this rule, it came out in final form in August and is about to be published in the Federal Register, and you'll probably see a flurry of additional news reports about that. The rule itself proposes to regulate the carbon dioxide emissions from existing fossil fuel powered plants. And it's a little different than some of the other EPA air regulations in that the rule is directed towards states. So EPA is generally not directly regulating the power plants in this rule, but rather setting targets for emission reductions from these plants. The states then come up with how they want to get there. And the rule has many benefits, of course, in reducing our potential climate impacts. So the climate benefits estimated at $20 billion, but also important health benefits related to some of the other air contaminants that will also be reduced as a benefit of the rule, result of the rule. So states have the key role here. States will develop plans that set out their emission reduction measures. And one of the categories available to states is end user energy efficiency, or electrical efficiency specifically. And that by reducing the amount of electricity required from fossil fuel power plants, then that avoids the emissions associated with that generation. So that's the idea, that if you can reduce your electricity demand, you can reduce the operating requirements and therefore avoid those carbon emissions. There are some different mechanisms, and Khalil will talk more about some of that. But the big picture takeaway is that states do have significant flexibility to use efficiency to avoid emissions, as long as their electricity savings are real and measurable. Key dates are that states, the target date for states to submit their plan is next September 2016, but they can also decide to request an extension and give EPA some base information on what they're planning to do. If they do that, the latest date then becomes September 2018. EPA's role here is they are continuing to issue guidance and will have a role in approving plans in the regional offices. And Khalil will talk a little more about that as well. So there's the opportunity for efficiency and affordable housing then includes 2 aspects of the Clean Power Plan, the state plans. One thing that's getting a lot of attention is the Clean Energy Incentive Program. And EPA is providing extra credit to incentivize action for the first 2 years prior to the compliance period. And that credit is available in terms of end user efficiency only for efficiency benefiting low-income communities. And that's awarded double credit. So that will be the sort of immediate focus, is how to maximize that opportunity to get extra credit, and it's a big bonus for states. Of course, the projects that are implemented for the early action program, many of them that have long-lasting energy efficiency improvements, so that energy efficiency gets counted in the future. So if you have say a new affordable housing complex that is saving 30% on electricity use compared with baseline code, and that is projected to last through the next 20 years, then you could count that credit going forward each year, the amount that's saved. But importantly, the state plans will also allow crediting for efficiency. So as you think of the overall state planning process, you want to look at both the Clean Energy Incentive Program, but also like the overall state plan, so that there's continued investment throughout the compliance period. So the opportunity here is that residential sector really is key to and offers significant end user efficiency gains to the state and significant avoided emissions. This pie chart shows the makeup of retail electricity use, and we see that residential comprises 38% of that. We're arguing that affordable housing must be part of the new investment to reduce that electric usage. The states can benefit in multiple ways by including affordable housing efficiency in their plans, by lowering household electricity bills. That generally translates to increased spending in the local economy, and that benefits the state through those tax streams. Also, reducing electricity costs helps preserve affordable housing, and that's a big challenge in a lot of areas. So by reducing the operating costs, that can free up capital and allow investment to keep affordable housing in better condition. Also, the savings available to a state by employing the sector are significant, and EPA has some estimates available looking at that affordable housing alone, electric use could be cut by up to 26%. And again, with that double credit available for those early years, that could be significant to state compliance. And finally, there's co-benefits to low-income communities, including potential health impact by reducing risk of environmental contaminants and improved temperature control and comfort. So states have a number of options available. Just to put a little meat on the bones of what we're talking about here, there's a number of ways to improve energy efficiency and affordable housing. And generally, there are measures available for both new construction and existing buildings. So commissioning and the existing building version of that, retro-commissioning, look at maintenance, reducing loads to fit the current occupancy and use patterns, and education of building operators and tenants and occupants are all measures that are proven to be successful in attaining efficiency. Lighting, from bulb fixtures to more sophisticated controls, energy efficient appliances, doing work to improve the building envelope through insulation, doors, windows, weatherizing, etc. And heating, ventilation, air conditioning equipment can be used to reduce loads and assure proper ventilation rates. And finally, water use is another way to reduce electricity use with fixtures and irrigation and so on. There's a number of state policies available. States can, first of all, set up, if they're going to use trading programs or registry, ensure that's set up in a way that is accessible to affordable housing. Affordable housing may have some unique barriers to getting involved in that sort of system. Also, low-income housing tax credits can have energy efficiency requirements associated. State housing trust funds may be used. There's also private sector incentives that can be used, including tax incentives as well as ways to reduce financing costs. And then states can run programs directly, encouraging local government incentives or through technical assistance. Utility programs also run a range, and there's some existing programs out there we'll hear more about from Lauren. I just wanted to highlight that some utilities have whole building incentives for either new construction or retrofit, and those are based on basically a certain payback per kilowatt hour saved. So that can be applied in the affordable housing context, and there's also individual component programs. So lastly, what can advocates do to realize this opportunity? And just very briefly, the primer has a couple sections on this. Page 2 has a checklist, which show your high level, how you get started with some contacts and connecting with other groups. And then page 6 has additional information, and I know we're going to hear from Todd with some good tips on that. So thank you all. Turn it back.
Thanks, Liz. And I'm going to turn it right over to Khalil, so just bear with us while we switch over to his presentation. Khalil, are you with us?
Yes. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to this presentation. Thank you to National Housing Conference and the Green Affordable Housing Coalition for hosting. And before I go into my presentation, I just want to say, that I think, overall, what I hope that people will take from these presentations, because you're going to get a lot of information here today. But overall, what I hope you take, and I think first was demonstrated very clearly in Elizabeth's presentation, where she showed the pie chart where the residential sector accounts to roughly 38% of our final carbon emissions from electricity. And what that should say to the affordable housing community is that when you come into this conversation, you're not coming into someone else's conversation. This is a conversation about you. This is a conversation about our homes, about where we live, how we use energy, how we maintain value, how we maintain quality of life, and how we maintain comfort in our residency. So you shouldn't feel apprehensive about coming into this conversation as if it's coming into someone else's space, because this is really about housing. And second, which you'll get a lot more from my colleague Todd's presentation, is that there are allies here who are willing to go to bat with you. It's better to go to bat with you than for us to go to bat for you. So we really need your engagement and your involvement in this process. This presentation is not just for information only, but we really hope that you will follow up, check in with us, reach out to us, and really, reach out to your state air regulators and really get involved in the process going forward. And I'm sorry for that little preamble. But just really briefly, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and again, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Khalil Shahid with the Natural Resources Defense Council here in Washington, D.C. We came into this work through our Energy Efficiency for All project, which is a national partnership with the National Housing Trust, excuse me, Elevate Energy and the Energy Foundation, where we're actually working in 12 states to expand access to energy efficiency programs to the affordable multifamily housing sector. Okay, moving forward. So my presentation is going to cover, just some of the nuts and bolts of the Clean Power Plan and where is it and what are the likely scenarios for actually accessing energy efficiency for affordable housing. So first, as you know, the Clean Power Plan will reduce our electric sector's carbon pollution by 32% from 2005 standards. It will do this by by helping us to shift from, fossil fuel generated electricity, primarily coal, but also some natural gas as well. It will help us also to cut other power plant pollutants such as NOx, SOx, which are leading causes of asthma and other respiratory illnesses. The EPA estimates that there will be approximately 90,000 fewer asthma-related attacks in children, which means parents don't miss work, children don't miss school, cumulative by 2030. And also, which is really the point of this conversation where we're talking about energy efficiency, the increasing energy efficiency as a result of implementing a Clean Power Plan will save American families upwards of $155 billion by 2030. All right. As Elizabeth detailed earlier, the final rule was actually released this past summer, and now a lot of the impetus and a lot of the decisions actually shift to the states. And so there are some key decisions that states are still going to be wrestling with that are going to be key issues for us as advocates to really work with them on to get engaged and to make sure that our voices are heard. First is the issue of whether states are going to pursue an existing only or an existing plus new compliance standard. Basically that means, is a state going to regulate existing power plant emissions and not regulate new plants that could be built after the compliance period begins, or will the state include all plants, existing or new? Will the state develop a rate-based or a mass-based compliance plan? I will talk a little bit and explain that a little bit later in the presentation, so don't get too caught up into that right now. Will the state implement the Clean Energy Incentive Program, and will the state, or how will the state ensure meaningful engagement of low-income communities and communities of color in planning, implementation, and monitoring of the rules implementation from now until 2030? And so what's actually in the CPP final rule? Because there was a lot of debate in the lead up to the release of the rule, but what's actually in it? So, I think, what's still there, the EPA, sets the standards, but states have to develop and submit the plans. The EPA created a flexible framework for states to create plans based on their own unique circumstances. It also extends the time for states to actually begin implementation from 2020 to 2022 to give them more time. It reduced the number of building blocks from 4 to 3. Still in there are improving the efficiency of power plants. We can shift the generation from higher emitting steam electric generation units. So coal, for example, shift from coal to lower emitting natural gas plants, and best of all, shifting energy generation from fossil fuels altogether into clean energy renewables. Demand-side energy efficiency is no longer a building block, but it is still a key element, or it should be, or we expect it to be a key element of states, plans to comply with the Clean Power Plan. The reason why it was taken out is energy efficiency, first and foremost, is about reducing the demand for energy, whereas the previous 3 building blocks were about addressing the energy production or generation. However, by investing in energy efficiency, utilities can still lower demand for energy and thereby reducing the cost of compliance, which again, I'll get into a little bit more about how that works later. And then finally, the Clean Power Plan offers an additional incentive for energy efficiency through the Clean Energy Incentive Program that targets low-income communities. And I'll give a little bit more background on that now. The Clean Energy Incentive Program incentivizes early investments in wind and solar, as well as demand-side energy efficiency measures that are implemented in low-income communities. The EPA, through the CPP, will provide matching allowances under the mass-based approach or emissions rates credits under a rate-based approach for states that participate in the program. States have to at least submit an intent to implement the Clean Energy Incentive Program in 2016, when they deliver their draft plans. Demand-side energy efficiency under the CIP actually receives an additional credit, so it actually counts for 2 credits for each megawatt of avoided emissions through generation, and this is really done to help level the playing field because there, as we know, there are many, economic cost, barriers to investing in energy efficiency in low-income, in affordable housing, and so this was done to really try to level that playing field, but it really places low-income communities at the front of the line for implementation in this plan, because those of us who are advocates, those of us who are from low-income communities, who grew up there, who work and support and advocate for low-income communities, we know that typically, our communities are the last to receive benefits from any type of federal or state initiatives. But in this program, it actually sets it up where it provides incentives for states to actually invest early and invest first in low-income communities. The EPA is still actually, accepting comments on, some key issues around the implementation of the Clean Energy Program. So once it is published in the Federal Register, again, reach out to us, reach out to other allies and other partners, who will be coordinating, who will be working with folks on the ground, to make sure that we are in dialogue with each other and delivering useful comments to the EPA to support the CEIP's deployment. And so the Clean Power Plan also includes a federal implementation plan. So it gives states the option of adopting a state plan. However, if a state does not adopt a plan, or if a state adopts a plan that does not meet the standard that the EPA set, EPA under the Clean Air Act has a responsibility to regulate carbon pollution to protect our health, to protect our well-being, and the federal implementation plan under that context would then come into effect, where the EPA would act as a state regulator, working with a state to reduce its emissions based on the targets that are set. However, even if the federal plan is put in place, the state will still have the opportunity to review that federal plan, and if they don't like it, then resubmit a state plan, which if approved, will allow the state to be removed from the federal plan and to work under its own plan. And in addition to that, states who are operating under the federal plan may also adopt complementary measures to go along with it that help actually extend the benefits to wider communities as well. And the federal implementation plan, like the CIP, is also going to be open for comment, through EPA once it's published in the Federal Registry to help again, to figure out some of the nuance in terms of how that federal implementation plan is actually going to be put in place. So now I want to get into a little bit more of the details about, what does it actually look like, or how do we actually get to energy efficiency for affordable housing and for multifamily housing in particular. And so as I mentioned, states have 2 primary options for developing compliance plan. One is what we call the mass-based approach, which is basically where the emissions target for a state is expressed or is read as the maximum amount of tons of carbon dioxide. So just think of it as an aggregate number that the state has to get below. And then there's the rate-based approach, which is where the state goal is expressed as the number of pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour. And so it's the rate at which the state, produces the emissions has to change. So the emissions rate per megawatt hour has to be reduced in order to reach compliance under the rate-based approach. And so how energy efficiency investments actually work under these two approaches is going to be a little bit different. Under the mass-based approach, states will issue and set a price for and auction off allowances to utilities, which the allowances are basically licenses to emit a pound of carbon. Utilities will have to purchase allowances to emit carbon if they do not reduce their emissions below the required amount. But utilities can offset the amount of allowances they have to purchase by investing in energy efficiency in affordable housing, which lowers the demand for energy and reduces the amount of carbon they emit. And the second route through that mass-based approach is also by auctioning off those allowances, by making utilities and other emitters actually purchase those allowances. States are actually generating revenue. And that revenue, once accumulated, can approach, there's no need for any special accounting or tracking of the energy efficiency programs. And so under the rate-based approach, very quickly, the utility invests directly in energy efficiency to reduce the rate of emissions, to help it to reduce the rate of emissions. And then there is an independent verification process where the savings from that energy efficiency has to be verified, which are then verified by a state regulator who issues emissions reductions credits to the utility, for every megawatt hour of energy that is saved through energy efficiency. It's a little bit more complicated approach under the rate-based plan. It has to go through special verification monitoring processes, which can be difficult at times particularly for affordable housing, but it is still a possible approach if your state does decide to do a rate base. And also remember, under both of these plans, under the rate-based plan, the Clean Energy Incentive Program provides the additional credit for every megawatt of energy that is saved under energy efficiency, and under the mass-based plan, the CEIP will give the additional will have the additional allowance. Okay, and that's really all that I have. I look forward to the conversation and question and answer afterwards, and I'll turn it back over to Rebecca and NHC.
Thanks, Khalil. That was great. Really good information on the final rule. I just want to take a quick second before turning it over to Lauren to thank everyone for sending in their questions. We are compiling a list and just keep sending them on. As I mentioned, we'll have this list, so if for some reason we don't get to your question in the webinar itself, we will include it in the follow-up materials from the webinar. So you'll get an answer one way or another. And with that, I will turn it over to Lauren as soon as I pull up her presentation.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks, Khalil. And thank you to the National Housing Conference for the invitation to speak on today's webinar. I'm Lauren Ross, and I'm from the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. I lead our work on local policy, and in particular, in the past few years, we focused pretty heavily on energy efficiency in affordable multifamily buildings. For those of you not familiar with ACEEE, we are a nonprofit research organization dedicated to advancing energy efficiency. We work on energy efficiency across sectors of the economy, as well as developing policy at the local, state, and federal level. Today, I'll focus on the development of utility-sponsored energy efficiency programs aimed at affordable housing as being one strategy for how states can encourage energy efficiency in affordable housing under the Clean Power Plan. My goal is to show you what this might look like on the ground, and more importantly, a potential strategy you might consider advocating for in your own state. So what am I talking about when I say utility-sponsored programs? I'm referring to programs that are supported by ratepayer funds that are collected as a tariff or surcharge on the customer's bill. Ratepayer-supported energy efficiency programs have been around since the 1980s and represent the largest single source of money that states use or direct to be used for energy efficiency programs. Many utilities develop and run these programs in response to energy savings goals set by the state legislature or Public Utility Commission, or as a critical, or as a critical component of demand-side management.
Apologies, folks, for having trouble with our PowerPoint display. Okay, sorry.
No problem, thanks. So why are we talking about ratepayer-funded energy efficiency programs in the context of Clean Power Plan? A few of the earlier presenters already alluded to this, but by saving electrical energy, multifamily programs deliver emission reductions for existing power plants. So there it is in the context of the Clean Power Plan. Many of these programs are already being delivered, evaluated, and monitored in a way that would count towards compliance under the Clean Power Plan. Many states already have utility-sponsored programs that specifically serve multifamily buildings. And when I say specifically serve multifamily buildings, I mean those that are targeted at multifamily customers, not just residential programs or commercial energy efficiency programs to which multifamily customers would be eligible. So while there are a handful of programs and a very good programs, many multifamily customers still remain underserved by these types of programs. In 2013, ACEEE mapped utility-led multifamily programs across the U.S., and we found that multifamily programs are often overlooked in major metro areas, and even more specifically, 40% of the largest multifamily housing markets are not served by an energy efficiency program that specifically targets multifamily customers. So why is this problematic? Or rather, why do we see utility-sponsored energy efficiency, especially under the Clean Power Plan, as a major opportunity? Well, as myself and others participating on this panel have said and will continue to say, we see that these programs can be the most significant source of investment in energy efficiency. We know that successful multifamily retrofit programs that can also help to overcome traditional barriers that can hinder energy efficiency investments in the sector. For example, many of you are probably aware of the split incentive that exists between owners and their tenants. Owners have less incentive to improve the efficiency of their building if they're not benefiting from lower cost. But building owners also have to pay utilities, for example, for electricity to light common areas or outdoor areas and central hot water systems. But this barrier can be overcome with targeted incentives and financing directed at both owners and tenants. So overall, the good news is that there are a variety of utility customer-funded programs targeting the multifamily sector, ranging from no-cost direct installation programs to comprehensive whole building retrofit services. We need to build on these programs and best practices. We'll talk a little bit about that today. And to create both new programs in areas where multifamily buildings are not being targeted, and to scale up existing programs to achieve greater savings. And to reiterate a point I made earlier, designing energy efficiency programs to specifically target multifamily buildings is important because there are several unique barriers that building owners face when considering whether or not to invest in energy efficiency. Regardless if your state already has multifamily programs, the first step is to understand why you're advocating for these programs during your state's planning process and the unique opportunity that the Clean Power Plan provides to do so. Specifically, I note a few points here in terms of capturing energy efficiency investments for affordable multifamily buildings in state compliance plans could lead to additional financial support for utility multifamily programs. As I mentioned, a lot of these decisions are made at the state level. Could create permanence for programs, improve existing programs by increasing rigor and oversight. We'll talk about that a little bit in greater detail. also generate momentum for new projects and programs. And lastly, it's certainly a unique opportunity to link multifamily energy efficiency to broader state goals such as economic development, public health, job creation, and environmental issues. In thinking about what you would like to see implemented in your state, I provide here 2 examples of what I would refer to as collaborative program models, those utility programs that are pushing the envelope a bit. While best practices and emerging research are informing utility program design and delivery for multifamily energy efficiency programs, utilities themselves often know little about the workings of the affordable housing community, especially when it comes to the ability of building owners to take on additional investments. Successful programs, 2 of which I have listed on this slide, have partnered with housing finance agencies to inform both the design and participate in the delivery of their programs. Utilities are specifically well positioned to provide and have been found to be able to provide useful technical assistance to help owners navigate the retrofit process, from obtaining and understanding an energy audit, applying for incentives and financing, developing a scope of work, and ensuring that the work is completed correctly. Additionally, successful utility-led programs will also provide or help owners apply for available financing and financial incentives, and connect and sometimes train qualified contractors to do the work. HFAs, on the other hand, can offer unique assistance in the design, delivery, and outreach phases of these programs. They can ensure that program services are delivered in such a way that meets the unique needs of the affordable housing community. 2 programs in particular are worth noting. First, PSE&G, an electric and gas utility out of New Jersey, is currently running an award-winning program. They worked with their state housing finance agency to design and deliver this program. The program is based on a free on-site investment-grade audit of the multifamily facility, along with significant subsidies for the installation of cost-effective energy efficiency measures. Customers repay their share of the program installation cost over a period of 10 years on their utility bill, interest-free. PSE&G offers a program to all eligible residential multifamily housing, but priority is given to those properties that are receiving housing finance agency that are HFA financed affordable housing projects. So it's a collaboration between the utility and the housing finance agency, and it's really been critical for developing and delivering a successful program to that customer segment, which has traditionally been unable to take energy efficiency improvements. Because the HFA, and as I'm sure is the case in most states, manages the HFA in New Jersey, but it's likely the case in other states, manages over 500 multifamily projects, its knowledge of the segment and access to building owners and property managers has ensured that the PSE&G program is fully subscribed. In fact, there is a waiting list of projects. So PSE&G, the utility, actually attributes the pipeline of projects to working directly with the HFA. In Maryland, multifamily energy efficiency is actually delivered by programs are actually delivered by the Housing Finance Agency, which is the Department of Housing and Community Development. The Maryland HFA actually operates low-cost loan and grant programs with flexible terms for the purchase and installation of energy efficiency improvements in the affordable multifamily rental housing sector. And the program is set up so that multifamily rental properties seeking HFA funding, in addition to other HFA rental housing finance, are able to have a streamlined application process, so that at the critical time of financing, both energy and other energy upgrades and other recapitalization and redevelopment can be streamlined into that process. And this is an attempt really to simplify the process for building owners. And I don't want to spend too much time on this last slide. Todd is going to focus, following my presentation, Todd will focus on some of the ways that you all may engage in this stakeholder engagement process. But I wanted here to provide a list of questions that you all may want to start posing when you're thinking about the current state of multifamily programs in your state and what might be physically possible or achievable in your state. You know, traditionally in this space, our key audience has been utilities and those that influence them, but now we're talking to other state level actors like Department of the Environment, Department of Energy, air regulators. So these are several questions that you all may be asking when you're advocating for utility-sponsored energy efficiency programs. First, simply looking into whether your state has programs that are serving the multifamily sector. If not, what utilities are poised to deliver such programs? What policies support the development of these programs? What policies could support the development of these programs? For existing programs, what are the details of those policies in terms of implementation dates, stringency, financial commitments, historical investments? What are the energy savings that some of these programs have achieved? And again, if there aren't programs already active in your state, you may want to look at neighboring states with similar housing stock and see what type of energy savings programs are achieving in neighboring states. And then, again, if you have an existing program, what organizations monitor and oversee these programs, and what additional funding sources, maybe coming from HFAs, for example, are being used to support or leverage utility-sponsored programs. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you.
All right, with that, we're going to turn it over to Todd. So bear with us while we make that transition.
Am I up?
You are up. We can see your slides.
Okay, great. So Liz, Khalil, and Lauren, I thought, did a great job explaining, what the Clean Power Plan is and some of the opportunities it provides for energy efficiency and affordable housing. I'm going to spend a few minutes describing how you could participate in the planning process in your state to ensure that the communities you represent share in the benefits of the Clean Power Plan. I really liked the way Khalil started his presentation when he said that we shouldn't feel apprehensive about entering this discussion. And I think, I'm an affordable housing advocate. I think from many of our perspectives, this might seem overwhelming. What we've discussed so far, it's a pretty complex topic. But I think, to engage in the discussion as affordable housing advocates and stakeholders, we don't need to become, technical experts in the various mechanics or nuances of the Clean Power Plan, or get into the weeds about, rate-based versus mass-based compliance pathways. I think what the Clean Power Plan provides is, new venues where we can engage with and educate new partners about some of the many benefits of energy efficiency and affordable housing. And I think if we do that well, then we will certainly translate into new investments and resources for affordable housing. So I just wanted to stress the fact that the EPA is requiring states to demonstrate how they have engaged vulnerable communities, including low-income communities and communities of color, as the states formulate their plan. EPA makes it clear in the final rule that states should strive to provide programs that bring clean energy resources to all communities as part of their state plans, including low-income communities. And while the EPA makes clear that the overall benefits from the Clean Power Plan should exceed the cost, to the extent that there are increases in costs, it's critical that those costs not be borne by those least able to afford them. And certainly the EPA recognizes this and acknowledges this in the final rule. So Opportunities to engage right now. Planning is already underway in many states. States have to submit their initial plans to EPA by next September. And so many states are already in the process of soliciting feedback from stakeholders, holding public hearings. The implementation agencies should be very open to meeting with representatives of the affordable housing community in your state. Now would be a really good time to do that, to make that introduction and talk about the need and the benefits for improving energy efficiency in affordable housing. The sooner we can do that, the better, before the state gets too far down the road with putting its plan together. Lauren mentioned some opportunities, what you should look at in terms of the current resources that are available in your state. It would be a really good time to identify, energy efficiency opportunities that you'd like to see in your state and in your communities. What are the existing avenues and resources available in your state to make affordable housing more energy efficient? Can those efforts be scaled up? What are some new models that might work? And as I said, Lauren highlighted, there are examples of successful approaches that could work in your state that are currently being used in other states. And I should mention that EPA plans to provide specific examples of successful model programs. The agency is planning to develop a catalog of state and local programs that have successfully delivered energy efficiency benefits to low-income communities. And so these programs that they're going to feature can serve as models and will inform states as they work with communities to develop their clean power plan compliance strategies and plans. Another key audience is the governor. Governors, of course, are going to play a key role in driving the plans in their states. So educating your governor about the need to prioritize energy efficiency and affordable housing and the benefits of doing so is important. In addition, state legislatures are likely to play a significant role in your state. In some states, state legislatures have chosen to be involved in the process to inform the plan. So that's also an important audience. And one thought is, if as you think about you're making the case to the governor, to the state legislatures, is understanding what are some existing state energy principles, or what is in your state energy plan that relates to energy efficiency, and use that as sort of a hook to make your case for prioritizing energy efficiency in the Clean Power Plan. Forming new partnerships could be very helpful, reaching out to environmental justice, health equity organizations in your state if you're not already working with those groups. Thinking about forming alliances with other groups that share similar goals in terms of ensuring that the benefits of the Clean Power Plan are available to all communities. You've heard about the Clean Energy Incentive Program and the fact that the federal government, the EPA, is still working on finalizing that. It's a really important opportunity for reaching low-income communities, and EPA is still in the process of finalizing the rules and will be engaging the public for feedback on how the CIP can be most effective. And that certainly will include ensuring that EPA adopts a definition of low-income communities that is inclusive of affordable housing. So I would encourage everyone to be aware of those opportunities to provide feedback to EPA on the CIP. So I will just briefly go over this slide because I think it's been covered earlier in the presentation. But in terms of kind of making the case to the state that energy efficiency and affordable housing should be a priority, there are a few key reasons. One is simply lowering costs. As EPA has said in the final rule, energy efficiency is the least costly way for states to meet their pollution reduction targets. Focusing on energy efficiency and affordable housing will reduce cost burdens on families that are already experiencing significant energy burdens. When you talk about affordable housing, utility costs have a direct impact on the affordability of both individually and master metered rental housing. We know that the cost of energy is the highest controllable operating expense in affordable housing, and so reducing operating expenses is critical for preserving and maintaining affordable housing. There's a significant potential for energy savings in this stock. I think Liz alluded to this just by virtue of the fact that this is a sector that has not really been served all that much by energy efficiency programs. So we know there are plenty of opportunities to improve the energy efficiency and therefore reduce carbon emissions. And then again, Liz also mentioned this, but the health benefits that come with energy efficiency, being able to, for example, through insulation, sealing of air leaks, installing HVAC systems, being able to improve indoor air quality and reduce residents' exposure to asthma, allergens, and other indoor contaminants is crucial. So those are some really, I think, key messages that can be brought to the state as you make the case for prioritizing energy efficiency and affordable housing. And with that, I will turn it back over to Rebecca. Rebecca?
Todd, were you going to tell me I was muted?
Yes.
Thank you. Too many buttons to push. I apologize, everyone. As I was saying, thank you to Todd and our presenters. That was some really valuable content. We're going to dive into the audience Q&A because we got a lot of questions. If we don't get to your question, know that we are hoping to provide some kind of response in the follow-up materials. With that, I'm going to start with a question we got around mass-based versus rate-based, and I might shoot this to Khalil to start, and then other panelists feel free to chime in. We got a question around which is better, and I think what might be helpful is to just kind of explain a little bit about the pros and cons, benefits, negatives of mass-based versus rate-based, and how they both might serve low-income consumers just differently. But if you could kind of review mass-based and rate-based for us, Khalil, that would be helpful.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Again, I don't want to go too far into the weeds on mass-based and rate-based because, for one, you know, our expectation is that overwhelmingly the majority of states are going to take the mass-based option because it's what they are used to doing, you know, in compliance with the Clean Air Act. You know, that's the most common method of compliance. But there are going to be a few states, for example, you know, that may do the rate base. I think, you know, the biggest difference between the two is, you know, one, under the mass base, you know, you have this option, this opportunity that upfront utilities, you know, can and most likely will invest in energy efficiency to reduce the amount of allowances that they have to purchase. So that upfront reduces, you know, the cost of compliance for them. However, there are still going to be, you know, many utilities and generating units that are going to have to purchase allowances, you know, in order to continue to operate. And the revenue that is then generated there can be distributed out, you know, to low-income communities through, you know, a number of, you know, state agencies, housing and community development, you know, the HFA. It can go through many different sources, and so it's not bound by the traditional, you know, utility and energy regulatory system that traditional ratepayer-funded utility energy efficiency programs have to go through this system that can be very cumbersome and can actually put affordable housing at a disadvantage. Under the rate-based system, it's much more akin to that approach where it's just, utilities are investing directly. The savings have to be verified. And it's just a little bit, the barriers to access under the rate-based approach are just much more technical and much more, related to that, energy regulatory policy space, whereas under the mass-based, the major hurdle is going to be, really about, making sure that, one, the state does auction those allowances and doesn't just give them away, and then two, that, some, equitable portion of the revenue generated is going to be set aside and redistributed back to low-income communities. And so the advocacy approach is just going to be different. So it's not really about which one is better or worse than the other. It's just the approach, the decision tree that you follow to get to energy efficiency is going to be a little bit different.
Great, thank you, Khalil. Other panelists, you want to chime in on that question? Okay. Next question that I'm going to put to Lauren to start and then open it up again to the panelists is, we talk about the Clean Energy Incentive Program being for low-income communities. What does that mean? How are we defining that? This is a trick question.
Well, it's actually a question that we do get often, and that's not surprising because the EPA is yet to define what a low-income community is and what would qualify for low-income energy efficiency. So as I think both Khalil and Todd mentioned earlier, EPA is in the process, or will soon be in the official process, of taking comment on both of those aspects. So one is the definition of low income. Are we talking about a geographical boundary? And if so, what does that metric actually look like? And two, are we talking about defining a low-income household? That carries over to what is low-income efficiency. Is it just investment in residential housing for low-income households? Is it investment in a school in a low-income community where savings would result, would have carryover benefits for residents within that community? Is it for small businesses in low-income communities? Those are the types of questions that EPA is currently taking comment on. And you should look for, I'm not sure that as of today they haven't really posted the way in which they will be hosting stakeholder engagement around a lot of those questions, but they will be, I think, doing a number of virtual meetings and in-person meetings to reach out to a wide group of folks with input on those questions. Thoughts from other panelists?
Well, this is Todd. I'll just say from the perspective of, working on affordable housing energy efficiency programs, I think one challenge is making sure that whatever definition they come up with, that it really works well for affordable housing. And so perhaps having categorical eligibility based on a building being subsidized, for example, as opposed to having to require each household to document their income eligibility. I think that would be a good approach to cut back on some of the administrative burden that we often see when owners try to document the eligibility of their residents.
I think that's a great point, Todd. When folks are advocating, to think through what would make it the simplest or most streamlined way to deploy some of this on the ground would be helpful. So next question is, as Khalil mentioned in his presentation, there are now 3 building blocks when under the proposal there were 4, and the 4th was energy efficiency. So, and I'll just open this up to whoever wants to chime in, but what does that mean in terms of getting energy efficiency in your state plan now that it's not its own compliance pathway? We talked about the CEIP, but what about in the plan itself? So Liz is going to take that one first, and then we'll see who else wants to take that off.
So initially, when the final rules came out on August 3rd, there was a bit of reaction to not seeing energy efficiency in the building blocks. But on closer read of the 1,000-page rule, people were, I think, overall felt better because the building blocks are used specifically to develop the target goals, the compliance goals for each state. And EPA made a judgment that it wanted to rely on the other elements, but not end user efficiency in developing those targets. However, to sort of counteract that change, EPA is very explicit throughout the rule that it believes that end user efficiency is a good part of compliance, and made some additional measures or steps beyond the draft proposed rule to incorporate efficiency, including through the the ERCs, now I'm forgetting the acronym, emission reduction credits, and some other features of the final rule to, again, make it clear that efficiency is considered an important part of compliance.
Other panelists want to chime in?
Yeah, this is Khalil. Again, yeah, I think Elizabeth, laid it out perfectly. The only thing I would add is that, it's not a question of whether or not energy efficiency, will be included in the state plan, but it's, whether or not affordable housing is going to be included in the energy efficiency, investments. As we've seen, from the very beginning, announcement that this plan, or proposed plan, was in the works, and since the final rule has been released, the industrial and the commercial sectors have been, very active in, staking out their interest. But as we've seen, again, from Elizabeth's own presentation, the residential sector, is a little over a third, of our emissions, as a in-use source. And so, it's up to us and the affordable housing community and our allies to really stand up that sector and say, hey, you have to come, this is, again, if this is about us, you have to work with us, and we need to be included in this plan. So it's not whether or not energy efficiency is going to be there, it's whether or not affordable housing is going to be there.
That's a great point, Khalil, and I'll just take that opportunity to, again, encourage folks to check out the primer, which is available as a handout actually in the webinar itself, and we will email it out as well afterwards. But it does have a checklist and tips on how to get involved. Todd reviews those. States are starting to work on their plans, so it's not too early to figure out who the players are in your state. And that the best place to start initially, at least, maybe not the best place, but one place to start is your state air regulator, because they are going to be like the implementing source. So just want to plug that. Moving on to our next question. When we talk about the Clean Power Plan, part of what's so exciting is that there's potential for new activity and new resources for energy efficiency investments in affordable housing and for low-income communities. I was hoping a few of the panelists could elaborate on what do we mean by new resources? Where's that coming from? What could that look like? So that we're not just saying new resources without a little bit more detail behind it. Don't talk about it.
No, yeah, this is Khalil. I was hoping that Lauren would, or Todd, but yeah, I think, again, as it relates to, what those sources of revenue, I think, one, the revenue that's going to be generated from the selling and purchasing of the allowances under the, mass-based approach, two, utilities now, will have even greater incentive to invest in demand-side energy efficiency, to reduce the cost of compliance for them, because again, when we say that energy efficiency is the least cost path to compliance, that's exactly what that means. It means the utility either invest in, very expensive carbon capture or some scrubbers or whatever have you on a coal-fired generating plant, or they can, at a much lower cost and a much bigger bang, both to the utility directly, but also to the society as a whole. When you think about the benefits of energy efficiency in health and jobs and et cetera. And so, it is the least cost path to compliance. And so that creates much more incentive for utilities to ramp up their investment in energy efficiency. As a point of best practice, just for example, it would be great if every utility in the country, which now spend in excess of $12 billion annually on energy efficiency programs, but if every utility in the country spent 2% of their revenue, put it back into energy efficiency, it would be even more, and that would be a best practice. Most utilities are well under 1% of their revenues actually go back into energy efficiency. So that's what we're trying to get them to do.
And this is Lauren. I would just add to that, and Khalil, thanks for that. In terms of kind of clarifying, identifying what new resources or new investments from utilities would look like, and I'd also, in that great detail, in today's webinar on non-utility investments, there is a history and precedence for states investing in and devoting state resources, straight from the Treasury Office to support multifamily energy efficiency. It could be a revolving loan fund, tax incentives, other mechanisms for supporting and supporting investments in energy efficiency, and at the same time leveraging utility financial incentives. And that's something I alluded to earlier with the collaborative model of HFAs and utilities working together. And I'd say this too, and I'm kind of hesitant to get into this space now. I think it's a larger conversation, but there are some public housing authorities working on energy performance contracts that may also be a model of private investment, bringing in private companies to set up to work in the subsidized space of affordable housing is an important model too that may be adapted in other states.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Next question, and I'm going to send it to Todd first, and then see if anybody else wants to chime in. But we had a question around basically how folks could find out where states are at in terms of their planning, public hearings, listening sessions, that kind of thing. I don't believe there's kind of a publicly available national resource for that, but maybe you could speak a little bit how folks could find out what's happening in their state.
Sure, yeah, I wish there was sort of a central resource that kind of tracked all that information, but unfortunately no. But if you're working in a particular state, I would suggest going to the, your Clean Air Agency's website. EPA kind of encouraged states to create dedicated web pages that sort of post, what they're doing, what the process is. And I've seen that, maybe half of the states that I've come across have actually done that. And so there should be, a one-page resource that posts all of the information about any upcoming hearings and other opportunities to get engaged. And also that you'll also find stakeholder meeting information, agendas, presentations. So, it's not the case for every state, unfortunately, but I think for a good amount of states, if you go to the, Air Agency webpage, then you should be able to find some resources.
Great, thank you, Todd. Anybody else want to chime in on that? Okay, I will move on. This is more of a terminology question, but I think it is value for folks. We've had a couple people who are new to the energy space or new to the clean power plant space asking about credits or ERCs and what they are, what that means. So, Todd, do you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah, I wish there was a central resource that tracked all that information. I think for a good amount of states, if you go to the, Air Agency webpage, then you should be able to find some resources.
without getting too weedy, if that's possible, at least a high-level explanation maybe of what we're talking about when we say ERCs or credits. And Lauren's willing to take a stab. No.
Actually, I'm going to kick this one over to Khalil.
Yeah, I thought Khalil was on
They picked Khalil.
Is he on mute?
Okay, yeah. I was here screaming Lauren's name. Take it, take it, take it. Yeah, you know, I don't know if there is a non-weedy way or an easy way, you know, to explain the emissions reductions credits. You know, but essentially, you know, I guess, yeah, the nuts and bolts of it is that, you know, under the rate-based plan, you know, as utilities, you know, reduce their rate of emissions through energy efficiency, you know, energy efficiency, well, and really it's the same whether it's an energy efficiency project or if it's a renewable project. But you know, the question is, how do you know that, you know, you've actually saved or, you know, reduced the amount of emissions? For a renewable energy project, it's a little bit easier because you can just, you know, you can sort of track the energy that's produced or generated by a windmill, by a solar panel, or, you know, whatever have you, or you can track, you know, the emissions rate, you know, difference between a coal-fired plant versus a natural gas plant versus nuclear, which we don't want nuclear, but, you know, it's still an option for states to deploy. For energy efficiency, it's a little bit more difficult because there are so many questions that come up. You know, how do you know, you know, what the energy usage would have been, you know, without the energy efficiency measure that you paid, you know, because it's, you know, it's consumer behavior, it's the type of house, it's the time of year. There's so many different things that go into verifying, you know, that the savings are actually occurred. And so the emissions reduction credit is given after that, you know, savings is actually verified, and it's just a credit that a utility can then trade, you know, so it's actually worth something, you know, with other utilities who aren't able to earn as many credits for whatever reason. And that's as far as I'm going to go without getting into the weeds. And I hope I did that.
No, I think that was very helpful, Khalil. Thank you. We are hitting our 90-minute time block quickly, so I did want to get to a couple quick things. One of our audience attendees alerted us to a resource that we will also include in the follow-up, but just to let you know it's out there. The National Association of State Energy Officials, who's also been part of our working group on the Clean Power Plan, has a 111D resource hub. So there's resources there about the Clean Power Plan that you may find helpful. So I wanted to point that out. And then I also wanted to, I will pass this one to Todd, I think, and so he can talk a little bit about EPA's work in this space, because we got a question about if there were states that were more important for targeting in terms of advocacy who are less likely to be already looking at this piece, affordable housing in multifamily, in their Clean Power Plan implementation. And so if you wanted to kind of touch a little bit on your work maybe and thoughts about targeting. Maybe. Are you still with us?
I was on mute that time. Sorry. Okay, so yeah, so Energy Efficiency for All, or EFA, is working. We're working deeply in 12 states, and we've been doing that work prior to this Clean Power Plan work. Just our focus was generally working with utilities and utility commissions to increase resources available for multifamily affordable housing. You know, we kind of selected those states based on a number of factors, but looking at where the potential is great, where there's a lot of multifamily housing, looking at what type of sort of supporting policies exist, ERS or policies that basically require the utilities to invest somewhat in energy efficiency. Where there were strong partners on the ground, like the Housing Finance Agency. So in terms of targeting specifically around the Clean Power Plan, I'm tempted to throw that to Khalil because I know that NRDC has really done some work in terms of prioritizing states.
I'm sorry, Todd. Can you clarify? Like, what do you mean again?
So the question was to talk about, how to sort of target efforts to certain states. What would you look at? So I was mentioning that this is something that an exercise that NRDC has gone through, as I understand it.
Well, yes, but I think how to target it to different states. That is, I mean, really, that's a real tricky question. It's really subjective. I think, NRDC has, as an institution, has, sort of its priorities in the way that we looked at it. I think, one of the, keys was that, we looked at moderate senators. Who were some of the moderate senators, that we, felt that, we needed, and we felt that we could flip with enough advocacy, with enough support, or if necessary, enough pressure. So, who were those senators? So, you're thinking about states like Missouri, Iowa, Ohio, where there are some senators that may have been on the fence that we felt like we could flip if we, targeted them for engagement. But I think, if we're thinking about it, but that was NRDC acting as an advocate, trying to get the Clean Power Plan at the time and the rule established and passed, through the EPA, and now trying to defend it against, any type of, legal challenges or from the Congressional Review Committee. And so that's looking at it from that perspective. I think if you're looking at it from the perspective of, what are states that we need to prioritize, that really need the support, that really need the capacity. Obviously, the Southeast and the Southwest. Unfortunately, for much of the, quote-unquote mainstream environmental community, those states, those areas are just a large black hole. There's not a whole lot of investment. There's not a whole lot of work there. Those are states that, if any states are going to be are going to have the federal implementation plan imposed, those are going to be your likely candidates, unfortunately. So I think how you target states or how you select states is going to be different dependent on what it is that you're trying to achieve and what your interests are.
This is Lauren. I'm just going to add one comment to that. I think those are really good points, and just we're most of us are from national organizations, and something I find useful too, when from an advocacy standpoint, when talking or really trying to encourage action in particular states, I find that regional examples or regional best practices are always the best to share. When advocating in the Southeast, it's good to identify what programs in the Southeast are, in this case, achieving savings in multifamily buildings. I find that to be an important strategy, even where you think you can't get action because there's little going on in your state. Look to neighboring states for examples.
I think that's a great point to kind of close out that discussion, because we would encourage folks that regardless of where your state may fall in terms of their opinion about the Clean Power Plan's final rule, it's going to be worth advocating. This is a real opportunity to get new partners to think about energy efficiency for low-income consumers and multifamily affordable housing, and to maybe push the state to do something it hasn't done before. So regardless of where they fall on the spectrum of philosophy about this, it's worth getting engaged. There could be real outcomes. So we would encourage that as well. So the last thing I want to touch on before we close out is the rule for the final plan has come out, but as we mentioned about the Clean Energy Incentive Program, there are a couple areas that are up for comment, including clean energy, but there's a couple others. So if we could just touch on that, maybe Khalil, so folks are aware that there's an opportunity to provide comment, or Liz, we had a specific question about measurement and verification, which is why I bring this up, because that's also a point where we're not, we don't have as much information as we'd like because they're still determining. So just to kind of review what.
Yeah, we can summarize in the follow-up materials what the comment periods look like and what are the documents. One is the federal plan that's a proposed state right now, so that's open for comment. And also, I believe also the EM&B guidance, that's the measurement and verification guidance. That's very detailed technical material. Those are the main things. And I think we know, we've heard too that with the CEIP, there will be some sort of stakeholder or public outreach engagement later this fall. So that will be a chance to comment on things like how should low-income community be defined.
And remember that EPA's approach to this was to give states a lot of flexibility. So I think some of us want more answers than we're likely to get in some of these cases, and so there'll be, I'm sure, a lot of kind of thought groups and resources that NASIO, which Rebecca mentioned earlier, will be hosting on their Clean Power Plan kind of landing page, as well as AC Tripoli and others in this space. But really, other than EM&V and Clean Energy Incentive Program, a lot of it is final, with the caveat that there's much flexibility for states. So
that's a great closing thought. We just had a question about deadlines and comments, and so just to clarify, the final rule to implement the Clean Power Plan is final. There is no more opportunity to comment on that. That being said, there are these pieces that are still being determined by EPA, and they're going to seek public input, but they're on specific pieces of the final rule. And when we talk about the federal plan, what we're referencing is for states who do not do their own state plan, this federal plan will apply to them. So EPA is seeking input on that. Again, these will all be published officially in the Federal Register, and that's when the 90-day comment period will start. But none of us are aware that that has actually happened. We're thinking soon, hoping soon, but we'll let you know. You'll see resources from all of our organizations once that is available and we know more. With that, I will just ask if panelists have any closing thoughts.
Stay engaged. Yes. Thank you for your interest, and we hope this is a first step, or maybe not the first step, but that you'll stay involved.
I agree with that. Please stay involved and let any of us know if we can be helpful in your work. Absolutely.
And folks, that's why we left their contact information up so long. Please reach out to the panelists. They're happy to be a resource for you. The webinar materials will be emailed out. They'll be available on NHC's website. You can reach out to me as well. And we hope to continue to stay engaged with you in this work. So thanks for taking the time to be with us, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.